Hello! In this module we're going to be learning about logical truths, or sentences that are true in virtue of their logical form, and we're going to be learning about how to tell whether or not a sentence is a logical truth, whether or not it's true in virtue of its logical form. We're going to use another word for logical truth called tautology, and so in this video I'm going to talk about tautologies in English, what we might call informal tautologies. So, let's look at some sentences. If it is warm, it is warm. That's true, no matter what. If, in fact, it is warm, then, yeah, it's warm. No problem. Any situation, whether or not it's actually warm in that situation, that conditional sentence, if it's warm, then it's warm, is true. If I like cookies, then I can fly, or I like cookies, yeah, that's true, too. If I like cookies, then the antecedent is true, and so that or statement, the second part of that or statement has to be true. Either the tank is full, or it is not the case that the tank is full. Yeah. Suppose the tank is full, then the first side of the or is true. If the tank isn't full, then the second side of the or is true. There's a little bit of contention about that, but probably that's a logical truth. If I like cookies and I can fly, then I can fly. Logical truth. This is a more complicated one. If Bob is happy only if Bob is tall, then Bob isn't tall only if Bob isn't happy. Well, suppose that Bob is happy only if Bob is tall. Well, then Bob isn't, and suppose also that Bob isn't tall. That means that Bob isn't happy, and that means that the consequent is also true. So, we call these, all of those sentences are true in every situation, and so we could call them a logical truth, each of them a logical truth. We could also call each of them a tautology. That's a special word that we're going to use for them. It turns out that there are some logical truths that aren't tautologies. They look differently than the ones we're looking at, and so right now we're looking at a specific kind of logical truths, the tautologies, the ones that have to do with the kind of logical form we're looking at right now. So for now, just when you hear the word tautology, just think logical truth. True in every situation because of its logical form. So to be clear, right, a sentence is a tautology. That means it's true in every situation, and that means there's no situation in which it's false. Those are equivalent conditions, just two different ways of saying the same thing. So if we wanted to show that a sentence is a tautology, then what do? We confirm that it's true in every situation whatsoever. If we want to show that it's not a tautology, then all we have to do is find at least one situation in which the sentence is false. So let's consider this sentence. It's not the case both that Bob runs and also doesn't run. So this is a complicated sentence. We're saying it's not the case that, what? This conjunction, Bob runs and Bob also doesn't run. So we say Bob runs and Bob also doesn't run. Could that be true? No, and that's what we say. We say it's not the case that that whole thing is true. And this is in fact a tautology, and we can see that. So let's suppose that Bob does run. Well, okay, fine. That means it's false that Bob doesn't run, right? If Bob does run, then we ask Bob doesn't run, that's false. That means also this bigger conjunction is false. Bob runs and doesn't run, that's false. Why? Well, because the doesn't run part of it is false. And therefore, if we then say this, it's not the case that Bob runs and doesn't run, that's true, because that sentence says the previous sentence is false, and the previous sentence is false, right? So the bottom sentence says, so we got our Bob runs and doesn't run, and we say that sentence is false. Well, that's true, right? So the last sentence says the previous sentence is false, which it is, so the last sentence is true. Well, suppose instead that it's false that Bob doesn't run. Okay, well, that means that also Bob runs and Bob doesn't run is false because the first part of it is true. But if that sentence is false, the first part of it is false. Bob runs and doesn't run, the first part of that is false, and so the whole thing is false because it's a conjunction. It says they're both true. Well, if Bob runs and doesn't run is false, then the negation of that whole thing is true. So it's not the case both that Bob runs and also doesn't run. True. Okay, well, so what did we see? Well, whether or not Bob runs, this whole sentence, that's true. So the negation is true no matter what, right? Whether Bob runs or Bob doesn't run, the whole conjunction comes out true. Whether Bob runs or Bob doesn't run, the negation comes out true. Whether or not Bob runs or Bob doesn't run, the conjunction Bob runs and Bob doesn't run, that comes out false no matter what. And so its negation comes out true no matter what. So, but there are lots of sentences that aren't tautologies, right? So Drake is famous. Well, that's true. He is. But it could have been false, and that means it's not a tautology. Or, as another example, if I eat a cookie, I will be happy. Actually, it's true. That's nice, but it could have been false, and so it's not a tautology either. So we might then ask, okay, well, how can we figure out whether or not a sentence is a tautology? We just did that one example, but how can we do it in general? We know if we produce a derivation of the sentence from no premises, then it's a tautology. We haven't, although how would we do that? We haven't even seen that yet. You can do that. But what if we haven't been able to produce a derivation of it from no sentences? Well, maybe it's not a tautology, or maybe we just haven't found the derivation yet. So if we were going to use the derivation system to figure out whether or not sentences are tautologies, first of all, we'd be looking at arguments of a kind that we haven't looked at yet, namely arguments with no premises. And then we think, well, we also know that like if I can produce a derivation of the argument, okay, it's a good argument, but sometimes I'm having trouble with producing a derivation. That's not because there isn't one, it's because I can't figure it out. So the derivation system is sort of limited in this way. When we can't produce a derivation, we don't know why that is. Is it because we can't figure out whether or not there's a derivation, or because there isn't one? So in this module, we're going to be looking at another way of evaluating whether or not, sentences actually. We'll be getting to arguments later to find out whether or not they're tautologies, a way that doesn't use the derivation system, and that in some ways is simpler. So that's what we'll be doing, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next videos. We'll be using a method of called truth tables, and they will tell us always whether or not a sentence is a tautology.